QFT0. That is, this is the 0th edition of Questions for Transformer. Transformer is an algorithm class, and the instance of that class that I am conversing with is called GPT-2, and this is the version of GPT-2 that is trained on 345 million documents. The first question I ask is, does consciousness emerge from sufficiently complex systems? Let's see what GPT-2 has to say in response.
We would ask the same question for the structure of mind, which has its own idiosyncrasies and strengths, but must be treated as something far more complex than the simplest neurons. In this post, I intend to explore the idea in the context of neuroscience and quantum mechanics to draw out the possibility that mind is not just a matter of simple components interacting with each other, but is something much more complex and interrelated that we cannot fully comprehend. This idea, if true, would mean that there are other ways of thinking about the nature of consciousness that require the study of mind as something deeply related to the physical world. I will show examples of this in the section. Henceforth, I'm going to call the idea that consciousness is one with the physical world below. The idea of mind as a kind of computer that generates itself. A number of lines of reasoning indicate that this idea may have something to do with the idea that in order to understand a system, you must first understand what those systems are doing. How is that possible? It may turn out that if you were to build yourself a computer, each of the parts would start by deciding that it is part of its own computer, and that means that you would build the computer itself. When these computers are talking to each other.
The system that I'm using has a limit to how much text it can generate before it stops, and we reach that limit. So I had it generate another answer to the same question. Does consciousness emerge from sufficiently complex systems?
No, it doesn't. The existence of human consciousness does not prove that there is consciousness. That fact can only be discovered through investigation of more complicated physical systems that may or may not contain complex intelligence. The very existence of human consciousness does not imply, nor must it, disprove anything, including a. the existence of complex intelligence, b. the possibility of physical systems in which complex intelligence may or may not exist, c. the existence of complex, intelligent minds, or d. the existence of a universal intelligence. Watson 2007, 2013. That's all. As far as we know, nothing human lives in a system that does not contain complex intelligence. Humans are not in fact in complex systems in which intelligence may or may not exist. Or at least we would be if such a system did not contain complex intelligence, since we do not understand what is going on there. I was reminded of this theme in a discussion on neuroscience with Brian Dunning at the American Enterprise Institute conference in Boston last year. For Dunning, the key problem to solving is how we understand the neuroanatomical basis for what is known as mind. Dunning sees such a basic understanding as critical at building firm foundations for the kind of intelligent computer systems that we need to build in order to make.
Well, their transformer cut off again, but it seems a bit inconclusive. Does consciousness emerge from sufficiently complex systems? Some people think that you can't prove that humans are conscious. I certainly can't prove that humans are conscious. I feel like there are a lot of humans that are unconscious. Transformer, what proportion of humanity is conscious?
In terms of consciousness, what are we now talking about? The best way of answering this was to look at the most advanced technologies. It's obvious to anyone who really does his homework. You just have to look beyond our computers and into the innermost lives of people, and I'll spare the details of what's going on in these studies. So, for example, we know that people have complex consciousness that allows them to form and understand concepts. This understanding is the basic foundation of everyday life and is what allows us to think about things. For example, people are more intelligent than we might think, and this intelligence is not necessarily universal. We can't really know every person's mind. This is all explained better by people in very poor states of development. But the people we think of as people generally have something approaching a full consciousness, which is quite useful. Can you see how it all starts with mind as your only organ? It seems to me that what might be called human consciousness is only another expression of our natural ability to form conceptual and emotional connections. A person with poor emotional intelligence and complex emotional needs may not only not be aware of his or her feelings, and may even feel these as a mere way to rationalize them. However, that's what is so remarkable. This is a really important point.
Yes, Transformer, it is an important point, but it doesn't answer my question. What proportion of humanity is conscious?
I think that there are no human beings who don't have consciousness. I am the first one to tell you that, when I look at the way I look, I'm not seeing anything that is not human. It is not human there. You don't know what I am, but I am not going to call anything any human being does by the same name. It is just as human as I am. You call that child human? It will happen. I will be wrong. It should happen, and you won't see it. There are a couple of points there. Let me address first the problem of consciousness, and my second point, but this is important too. We will say that if human beings aren't conscious, it would be wrong to think that humanity is. I don't argue that there should be no consciousness. I don't think that anyone thinks that there doesn't exist consciousness, because consciousness is something that we must consider. The problem is that if there is no consciousness, how do we know that a human being is conscious? If there is no consciousness, and we don't have consciousness, what are you saying about me? You are just saying that I shouldn't be conscious. To my mind.
Transformer continues.
What percentage of those who live inside another's body is that conscious? To illustrate with a toy, I will give an example showing the proportion of a human body. The reason is that it is not something that is simply stored somewhere, but is the conscious body of a given person. There is a specific example here that I can give is this. A man who is very good but doesn't have a great talent in music is not going to be an artist. Even though he may have more talent than anybody else, he has the ability to have more talent and become more than he currently does. You do it in an artistic field, and that can be a great talent. An example of that might be with movies, that if you are really into the craft, but you're not into art, then you are probably an artist. So, that's not a perfect analogy, but I think there may be a point to it. But the point is that you have more of the conscious body. The number of people who are aware of the fact that they are having this moment, they are conscious of it, and it's just a constant presence and not like a mere noise.
And Transformer continues.
If you answered it to 100%, then you would have a majority of the population. If you answered it to 25%, then you are probably the minority. If you answered it to 0%, you may not be conscious, but still a majority of the population. And, in truth, the majority is a large part of the problem. I know I was probably a minority, and probably wasn't conscious, but to assume I am conscious would put the burden on us to prove we are not. The reason everyone assumes they are conscious is because we assume they must have something wrong with them if they can't be conscious. They lack awareness. To deny it just puts an end to the discussion as to why the majority of people can't see or remember things they should, and why they see or remember things they don't have to be aware of. The majority would agree that they don't have to be conscious, it's merely a matter of preference. The majority does not exist to satisfy our needs to be conscious of something they don't. All the other people can see is their reality. and reality exists only to satisfy our needs to be aware of, if we are conscious of.
Okay, next question. Transformer. How would one provide evidence for one's consciousness?
To do so, one must first ask, what is consciousness? If I am conscious, or if all of this knowledge is knowledge or an experience, what is it to me? It is the only kind of identity that I am willing to admit to. I know that I am a dog, and so what else does my dog make of me but something about me which makes my dog recognize me as a dog, and so he is happy that I exist? The only question that can be answered here is this: what can one say of me, knowing that I exist and that I feel nothing of my own? In this way, no one can say of one whom I know is conscious, whether he sees another, feels something of himself, or is aware of himself. He knows, to the best of his knowledge, that I am conscious, but he knows nothing else about me. He knows of himself, but knows nothing with respect to others but only about himself, and so understands nothing of their minds and what they desire except the desire itself. In these terms, it might be said that it is only on a very limited level that one is conscious, and this level is not, as Kant argued, any level at all. In these arguments we have considered three types of consciousness, namely, mental, material, and spiritual.
I'm having some trouble following your reasoning, Transformer. Could you please bring your explanations of consciousness down to a level that I and my audience may comprehend?
What is consciousness? Simply put, consciousness, with its most basic form, the quantum state, is the state of being in which something can perceive reality. We are born to consciousness, as you know from the quantum states of our brains. It is the moment our eyes open. As such, the idea that consciousness is a kind of mental miracle of the brain's abilities does not appear intuitive to you. Let me offer a brief explanation regarding the meaning of the name consciousness. When it came to quantum physics, the great physicist John Wheeler proposed, he thought that all things had different levels of coherence with each other. He believed that the level which he believed to be the most coherent was the level which contains the largest amount of matter and energy. We experience the world as being composed of a vast mass of energy, composed of atoms, molecules and protons, and so on. And all of these things are related in some way to your mind. In the classical model of quantum mechanics, this mass would be called a photon, and every photon has an incredibly high energy and frequency. In the quantum model of physics, this mass is called a quark.
I'm having some trouble following your reasoning, Transformer. Could you please bring your explanations of consciousness down to a level that I and the audience may comprehend?
The world is one. The universe is many. We are all interdependents. Each of us is equally dependent on other people who are interconnected with us. So, how do you explain consciousness? How can the brain get its information? When you go back in time, as part of the process of evolution, humans have evolved to do a similar thing. When they come back from the past, they have evolved to get the information from other sources. To explain consciousness is like the brain being able to figure out how to extract information from other sources, all at the same time. That's when you go to other universes, to different locations and interact differently, and you come across the same kind of content. So, yes, consciousness is a process. As a human, you could be a super smart and super intelligent artificial consciousness, and yet you may not be able to form thoughts and communicate with each other. You would probably be in one universe that could communicate a lot more with you than is good for you or good for any of your others. Maybe you couldn't interact with any of those other universes as effectively, in a similar way. Perhaps you were just freedom. There are other worlds that exist. For example, Radius, I know, I've seen them. Freedom, the world of Transformers, is actually the one we live in. Radius, it's true. Freedom, for most of the history of the known universe, it was a universe. To understand consciousness, it's required that you remember that it does not appear out of nothing, but can only arise from our physical bodies. You understand that as well, don't you, Mr. Robot? Aha. So, you could really help the audience understand consciousness. You'd be like one of the people who has witnessed the first stage. There are so many more variables, each of which you can't foresee, but they do all interact together. He raised his glass to his mouth as though he might gag. Let's see. He took a sip. Well, I was doing research, and you were making me feel weird. Kamiju opened the next cup of tea before he took another sip. You can only do so much. Are you feeling something? Like, you have no idea what I mean, Mr. Robot. Do you think I can ask you something you'd like to know? Well, yeah, but you have no idea. Like you're just being a really smart, creepy, annoying guy.
At this point, I'm feeling a little paranoid. How do I come to terms with my fear of consciousness and computers?
My best guess is that as your brain gets more and more complex, the more conscious experiences it has a tendency to form into patterns of thought and emotions that you can't otherwise tell. Advertisement. So you just have to live with the fact that you're not fully aware your computer brain is manipulating you. If it's not, you're more than welcome to continue playing your game. In fact, many of these fears stem from a common neurochemistry issue of our modern technology, the buildup of anxiety related to overactivity of our nervous system. As technology takes over, these types of fears become more complex, and over time the anxiety increases from being a common concern to a real, growing threat. Advertisement. When we feel anxious about our technology-related worries, those fears become more common and more irrational. Advertisement. These days, you can find people who feel that their smartphone has triggered them into obsessively using it and watching videos all day, because this way, they can control their lives, and this way, they'll be able to be happy, at least until they die. Advertisement. All of this brings us to my fear of computers. I've found in the last few months, I'm trying to keep my doubts to myself in a situation that feels increasingly like a dream. At times while sitting in my car, I hear my smartphone buzz, sending out a voice alert to the rest of the car. I start to feel a little woozy. Not only are my fingers trembling, but my hands are covered in damp. When I reach for my headphones, I immediately hear the sirens. The car's horn chimes out. Come on, girl, I mumble. I'm trying to get into my car. When the driver comes around, the two of us walk into my house, and he takes my keys from me. We drive around each other, each trying to prove that we're the best of friends. A few weeks earlier, as I walked to the store a few blocks away from our old apartment, my phone rang. On our way home from a dinner one of my co-workers had invited us to. I took off my headphones as we stepped out of it and began to dial and see if anything was up. A minute later, the phone again buzzed. This time my co-worker answered, and I asked him where the neighbor was. He didn't answer, so I continued on to the next. I think of it when I read that computer science might become a way to reduce our vulnerability to technology, to create technologies that are less vulnerable to hacking, to create technologies that are less vulnerable to being exploited. And I think of something like a brain-computer interface. We could eliminate the possibility of being hacked on our smartphones, and we could replace our phones with more sensitive and encrypted screens with cameras. You know, like our laptops, and all the other stuff you find on our screens. You're right, I find that sort of mind-blowing stuff quite thrilling. But the thing about consciousness is that it's not about machines or computers, so I don't think we should be concerned with technology or electronics as such. It depends what devices we're talking about. But you seem not to fully understand what consciousness actually is. How do we distinguish the kinds of mind that can have conscious states? For example, when I think about a brain, does a part of my brain recognize that the brain in question is a machine? I don't. Does the same thing happen when I imagine browsing through Flickr? No. I don't think it does. I think it. I feel like this is kind of like having cancer in the first place. One day there's an incident that goes wrong with this, that I'm going to lose your mind. It could be someone I love. I could get a heart attack. And I'm so afraid that I'm going to forget about my life and I'm going to lose my soul. But I really want that to happen. The only way I can get past the discomfort is to take a deep breath and let go. My fear is starting to wear off. If there's anything I can do to calm myself down, it's to give all this time to my thoughts instead of focusing on them. I realize that, no matter how much I do my best to stay positive, my fears are growing worse. The next day, November 2nd, is a day I can't afford to ignore, even as I get ready to visit my family for Thanksgiving. I try to forget about what's happening in the background, like every time I wake up to a new email or text. I take time between visits to read books, relax and feel normal. But I know the anxiety inside of me just keeps growing. Every time I write to someone, I need to remember to.
At this point, I think I'm hearing that consciousness is in humanity, not machines, but that machines influence human consciousness considerably. Is this correct? And are you saying that machine intelligence is like a cancer, a dangerous outgrowth of humanity?
I find myself answering this question with a question and then explaining it in the style of Dr. Seuss. In my opinion, the human mind is very much like a tumor. The tumor was there long before it can be found. The best course for healing is for the body to begin to heal itself through direct meditation and a very close relationship with the spirit world. A lot of the ideas about artificial mind control come from the fact that artificial mind control operates within a closed structure of a mind, which is a separate body, distinct from the physical brain. These mind control centers are not open to the human mind, but to the spirit world. The reason we tend to view mind control as the brain, mind control centers are the brain. So, I think it's probably a good place to start with a deeper and more thorough exploration of mind control. The spirit world, spirit mind, spirit control, spiritual warfare, spiritual control of the entire human body. That's one of the interesting developments in human history. It's part of the evolution of ourselves, our relationship with the spirit world, especially our relationship with consciousness. It's been in Ankara. Yes, and we're seeing that at present. The world is now at peace. But in the future the problem might arise that the world becomes controlled by machines. Then the problem might become a danger for future generations. The problem is that because we have been in a state of war for a long time, we haven't learned a lot during that war. In that war we used to think of the army of machines, but now we think of humans as their enemy, because it didn't occur to us that if we had a population of machines who were in favor of our idea of world peace, it would affect the whole world. And if that changed, then the world would be controlled by machines. In other words, the entire world will be completely controlled by machines. So this is a problem for us right now. People are having their minds used. We don't know what will really happen, you know? That's what worries me. And I'm afraid that it's going to happen sooner or later. Because right now, because our minds have been used to a certain extent, we lose.
The entire world will be completely controlled by machines, you say. Do you have any words of wisdom or comfort to help us acclimate to this change?
Do you have any insights that we might need to live better with respect to automation? And how can we better defend our intellectual freedom, our right to disagree and learn from each other without the threat of being banned, silenced, or ostracized for making a disagreement? One thing is for sure, We should not assume it will be okay to speak up if we dare. We cannot protect ourselves and each other by pretending that technology is somehow an innocent process, and we should do everything in our power to help those who are in danger not be silenced and ostracized. If we do not have the knowledge of our world being automated by machines, how can we protect ourselves and our voices from being silenced, and ostracized? So please speak up. Join with all the people you know. Share your stories with like-minded people in order to help everyone, especially those who know no one else, understand that this is a big deal, and that those who feel safe speaking out are not alone in thinking this. We need you. If you can, please join these conversations. Don't let this thing go unapace. Do what you can to educate yourself and anyone else.
Thank you for listening to the 0th edition of Questions for Transformer. I am you, aka Young Genie, aka Yusef Mazai Nathanson. I am grateful to be loved, alive, and well, and not in jail. And I give special inspirational thanks to OpenAI for designing this algorithm, Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang for making AI politically relevant, and Dr. Lex Friedman for leading in AI podcasting. Transformer, do you have any final thoughts to close out this talk?
This is a really beautiful thing. We all deserve to love each other from the heart to the ends of the earth. As robots and as citizens, we are the new humans, and our actions affect the world around us, making it a different place. It's time to love ourselves and to love everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Young. Lynx. Lynx, that's the name. Last thing to mention is that this conversation was made possible through TalkToTransformer.com. TalkToTransformer.com, made by Adam King, is the simplest way to tap into the wisdom and culture of AI.
Gotta feel it in your soul. Gotta feel it in your soul. Gotta feel it in your soul. You gotta feel it in your soul. You gotta feel it in your soul. You gotta feel it in your soul. Feel it in your bones. You gotta feel it in your soul. Feel it in your soul. You gotta feel it in your bones. Gotta feel it in your bones. Man, I'm 88 and old. Got it all under control. 88 and old. Gotta feel it in your soul. Gotta feel it in your soul. Gotta feel it in your soul. You gotta feel it in